The steam rising from the great bath caught the afternoon light in ribbons of silver and gold, but Cordelia Hartwell barely noticed. She stood at the edge of the colonnade, her gloved hands gripping the stone balustrade with a force that whitened her knuckles beneath the worn kid leather. The mineral-sharp scent of the water mingled with expensive perfumes as the fashionable gathered below, their laughter echoing off ancient Roman arches with careless abandon. Still unmarried at 32, Miss Hartwell? One wonders what standards you maintain that no gentleman has yet met them. Lady Pemberton's voice carried precisely the distance required to ensure her companions heard every syllable. Though perhaps the question is rather what gentleman would consider such standards relevant. Cordelia did not turn. She had learned over the years since her father's bankruptcy and subsequent death that turning only encouraged further sport. Lady Pemberton had been her mother's dearest friend once, before the money vanished and the creditors descended like carrion birds upon a carcass. "My dear Catherine, you grow cruel in your advancing years," another voice intervened, higher, sharper, belonging to Mrs. Dalrymple, whose own daughter had failed to secure a match in 3 seasons. "Miss Hartwell cannot help that her circumstances prevent her from gracing our ballrooms as she once did. Some of us remember when her gown set the fashion, before her father's unfortunate investments." The other women tittered. Cordelia felt the heat creep up her throat despite the cool spring air. She had come to Bath not for society but for employment. The Marchioness of Blackwood required a companion, someone educated and discreet, willing to read aloud for hours and ask no questions about the dark bruises that sometimes shadowed her ladyship's jaw. The wage was modest but sufficient. The work was quiet. Cordelia had thought herself safely beneath notice. She had been mistaken. "I heard she takes charity from the Blackwoods now," Lady Pemberton continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Reading Gothic novels to that peculiar Marchioness who never leaves her rooms. How the mighty have fallen." Cordelia's fingers tightened on the stone. She would not weep. She would not grant them that satisfaction. Instead, she focused on the mathematical precision of the Roman construction before her, counting the columns, calculating the gallons displaced by bathing bodies, anything to distance herself from the humiliation burning in her chest. "The lady in question," a male voice cut through the feminine cruelty like a blade through silk, "is my sister. I would advise caution in how you speak of her." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cordelia turned, as did every woman in the colonnade, to find a man standing at the entrance with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of winter ice. His coat was perfectly tailored, his cravat a masterpiece of understated elegance, and his face bore the kind of harsh, aristocratic beauty that made strong women reconsider their principles. Lady Pemberton's face drained of color. "Lord Blackwood, I did not intend—" "You intended precisely what you said." His voice was quiet, which made it somehow more devastating. "Your malice requires no interpretation, madam, nor does your vulgarity excuse itself through pretended ignorance." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The Earl of Blackwood, for Cordelia recognized him now from the whispered descriptions that circulated through Bath's drawing rooms, possessed the kind of power that rendered volume unnecessary. Men like him commanded through presence alone. Mrs. Dalrymple attempted a smile that wavered badly. "My lord, surely you misunderstand I misunderstand nothing." His gaze swept past them to Cordelia, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. "Miss Hartwell, I believe my sister requires your presence. If you would be so kind as to accompany me?" It was not a request. Cordelia managed a small curtsy, her mind racing. She had never met Lord Blackwood during her months in his household. He maintained a separate residence in Laura Place and visited his sister infrequently, always announced, never when Cordelia was present. The Marchioness spoke of him rarely, and always with a strange mixture of fear and fierce loyalty that Cordelia had never quite understood. "Of course, my lord." Her voice emerged steadier than she felt. He offered his arm. Cordelia hesitated for only a fraction of a second before placing her hand upon it. The muscle beneath the fine wool was solid as iron. He led her away from the baths without another word to the women who had tormented her, his stride long enough that she had to hurry slightly to keep pace. They walked in silence through the streets of Bath. past the crescents and squares that had once been as familiar to Cordelia as her own heartbeat. She had attended assemblies in these very buildings, danced in these rooms, laughed with friends who no longer acknowledged her existence. The city had become a monument to everything she had lost. Lord Blackwood's townhouse occupied a prime position in Laura Place, its facade elegant and imposing. A footman opened the door before they reached it, and Cordelia found herself ushered into an entrance hall decorated with restrained magnificence, marble floors, classical sculptures, paintings that even her untutored eye recognized as masterworks. "My study," Lord Blackwood said quietly to the footman, then to Cordelia. "This way, if you please." The study proved to be a large room lined floor to ceiling with books, the windows overlooking the private garden behind the house. A fire burned in the grate despite the mildness of the day. Lord Blackwood gestured to a chair near the hearth, then moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking her preference. "You are wondering," he said, handing her a glass, "why I have brought you here." Cordelia accepted the wine but did not drink. "I confess the thought had occurred to me, my lord. My sister speaks highly of you. She says you read with intelligence and respond to her moods with sensitivity. This is not a skill easily found." He remained standing, his own glass untouched in his hand. "She also says you ask no questions about matters that do not concern you. I am employed to read and provide companionship, my lord, not to pry into private affairs." "Yes." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but an easing of tension. "You are discreet. That is valuable. Perhaps valuable enough to merit a proposal I have been considering since learning of your situation." Cordelia's breath caught. "My lord, I do not understand. Your family lost everything in your father's death. Your mother lives with a cousin in Northumberland who provides housing but no material comfort. You have 2 younger sisters, one married to a country vicar on a living of £200 per annum, the other serving as a governess in Yorkshire. You yourself possess education, breeding, and intelligence, but no fortune and no prospects beyond the £20 per annum my sister pays you." Heat flooded Cordelia's face. "You have been investigating me. I investigate everyone who enters my household. Do not mistake it for personal interest. It is merely prudence." He set down his glass and crossed to the window, his back to her. "I require a wife, Miss Hartwell. My circumstances make this necessity rather than preference." The words hung in the air like smoke. Cordelia's hand trembled slightly, causing the wine to ripple in her glass. "I beg your pardon? I am 36 years old. I have a daughter of 14 who requires a mother's guidance and a sister whose situation demands the respectability of my being settled. There are also matters of inheritance, entailed properties that require legitimate issue to prevent their passing to a cousin whose character makes such an outcome intolerable." He turned to face her, and Cordelia saw that his expression remained completely neutral, as though he were discussing crop rotation rather than matrimony. "You need security," he continued. "I need a wife of suitable birth and character, who will not expect romantic sentiment or demand more than I am capable of giving. Our arrangement would be one of mutual convenience. You would have position, a comfortable home, sufficient income to assist your family. In return, you would manage my household, act as mother to my daughter, and fulfill the social obligations required of a countess. Nothing more." Cordelia's mind reeled. This was absurd, impossible. She was 32 years old, penniless, without beauty or charm or any of the qualities gentlemen sought in wives. "My lord, you cannot be serious." "I am always serious, Miss Hartwell. It is considered among my chief flaws." A ghost of something that might have been humor touched his mouth. "I do not make the offer lightly. I have observed you these past 2 months, though you did not know it. My sister's companion changes her behavior when she believes herself watched. You do not. You are consistent, competent. You do not gossip or seek to advance yourself through manipulation. These qualities are rare and valuable. But you do not know me. We have never spoken before this afternoon. I know what I need to know. You are intelligent enough to understand the terms of such an arrangement. You are desperate enough to consider it seriously rather than refuse out of misplaced pride." His eyes met hers, pale and penetrating. "I am offering you a choice, Miss Hartwell. Most women in your position have none." The truth of it struck her like a blow. She could continue as the Marchioness's companion until age or illness made her unfit for even that role, then spend her final years dependent on the charity of relatives who had already made clear their resentment of the burden. Or she could accept this cold, businesslike proposition from a man who spoke of marriage as though it were a legal contract between strangers, which she supposed it would be. What, she asked carefully, would be your expectations? Beyond the management of your household and care of your daughter. An heir, eventually, but not immediately. I would not press such a demand upon you without adequate time to become accustomed to the arrangement. He spoke as though discussing the weather. Public civility between us, private respect and discretion. I keep a mistress in London. I would expect you to tolerate this with the same lack of commentary you have shown regarding my sister's marriage. Beyond that, you would have considerable freedom. I spend most of my time attending to estate business and parliamentary matters. We would not be often in each other's company. A mistress, of course. Cordelia felt something twist in her chest that she refused to identify as disappointment. What had she expected? Romance, love. Those were fantasies for young girls with dowries and pretty faces. She was 32 and had neither. I must think on this, she said quietly. You have 3 days. After that, I will seek other solutions to my difficulty. He moved to the desk and withdrew a card, which he handed to her. Send word to this address with your decision. If you accept, I will procure a special license, and we will marry within the week. If you decline, you may continue in my sister's employment with no consequences. I am not a man who punishes refusal. Cordelia took the card, her fingers numb. And your daughter, what does she know of this? Catherine is away at school. She will be informed only after the marriage is accomplished. He studied Cordelia's face with that unsettling intensity. She is intelligent and willful. She will require patience and firmness in equal measure. My sister has tried to fill the maternal role, but her own situation makes it impossible. May I ask what happened to her mother? No. The word was flat, absolute. That is one of many subjects we will not discuss, Miss Hartwell. Some doors in this house will remain closed to you. If you accept my offer, you accept also that there are aspects of my life into which you will have no entrance. Cordelia rose, setting down her untouched wine. Her legs felt unsteady. I understand, my lord. I doubt that, but you will. He rang for the footman. Hoskins will see you back to my sister's residence. Give my regards to the Marchioness and tell her I will call upon her tomorrow afternoon. The dismissal was clear. Cordelia managed a curtsy and allowed herself to be shown out, the card burning in her reticule like a brand. As the carriage carried her back through Bath's familiar streets, she stared unseeing at the elegant facades and tried to comprehend what had just occurred. An earl had proposed marriage to her, not out of love or even attraction, but because she was convenient and desperate and unlikely to make demands he could not meet. It should have been insulting. Perhaps it was insulting, but it was also her only chance at a life beyond genteel poverty and slow decline into irrelevance. That night, alone in her small chamber in the Marchioness's house, Cordelia sat at the writing desk and composed 3 letters, one to her mother, one to each of her sisters. She did not seal them. Instead, she burned them in the candle flame, watching her careful words blacken and curl into ash. Some decisions could not be shared, even with those she loved. Some choices had to be made in absolute solitude. On the 3rd day, she sent word to Lord Blackwood. Her answer was yes. The wedding took place in the private chapel of Lord Blackwood's principal estate, Thornbridge Hall in Somerset. Cordelia traveled there with the Marchioness, who had wept upon hearing the news, and then clutched Cordelia's hands with desperate strength. He is a good man, the Marchioness whispered. Difficult, demanding, impossibly proud, but good, better than... She stopped herself, her eyes going distant and frightened. You will be safe with him. That is no small thing. Safe. What a peculiar word to use. Safe from what? The ceremony was brief, attended only by the Marchioness and Lord Blackwood's solicitor as witnesses. Cordelia wore a simple gown of cream silk that the Marchioness had insisted on purchasing, and carried no flowers. Lord Blackwood arrived in his traveling clothes, having ridden directly from London. He spoke his vows in a clear, measured voice, his expression revealing nothing. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Lord Blackwood, no, her husband now, she must accustom herself to thinking of him as such, pressed a cool, brief kiss to her cheek. His lips were firm and dry, The touch lasted perhaps 3 seconds. "You are now Lady Blackwood," he said quietly. "The solicitor has prepared documents regarding your allowance and the settlements for your family. We will review them after the wedding breakfast." There was to be a wedding breakfast. Cordelia had not expected that. It proved to be an elaborate meal served in Thornbridge Hall's smallest dining room, which still seated 20 comfortably. The food was exquisite, and Cordelia tasted none of it. She was married to an earl, to a man who spoke of contracts and obligations and kept a mistress in London. The Marchioness made gentle conversation, attempting to fill the silences. Lord Blackwood, Cordelia corrected herself, for surely she must learn to think of him by his title, responded with unfailing courtesy and absolute emotional distance. He might have been dining with the vicar or his steward for all the particular attention he paid his new wife. After the meal, they retired to the library where the solicitor, a dry-mannered man named Pemberton, no relation to the Bath harridan thankfully, laid out an array of documents. Cordelia read them carefully, aware that Blackwood watched her with that penetrating gaze. The settlements were generous, shockingly so. Her mother would receive an annuity of £300 per year. Each of her sisters would have a dowry of £5,000, enough to transform their circumstances entirely. Cordelia herself would have an allowance of £600 annually for her personal use, with separate household accounts and the right to draw upon them as she saw fit for the management of Thornbridge Hall and the London townhouse. "This is too much," she said quietly. "It is appropriate to your station as my wife." Blackwood signed the final document with a flourish. "Your family's welfare is now my concern. I will not have it said that the Countess of Blackwood's relations live in reduced circumstances." Pride. It was pride, not generosity. He was protecting his own reputation by ensuring hers was beyond reproach. Cordelia signed where Pemberton indicated, her hand steady, despite the magnitude of what these documents meant for her mother and sisters. When it was done, Pemberton bowed and withdrew. The Marchioness claimed fatigue and retired, leaving Cordelia alone with her husband in the enormous library. "I must return to London tomorrow," Blackwood said, pouring himself a brandy. "Parliamentary business requires my attention. You will remain here for the next month, becoming familiar with the household and the estate. Mrs. Daventry, the housekeeper, is competent and loyal. She will assist you in learning your duties." A month. He was leaving her alone for a month. Cordelia felt relief and something else she could not quite name. "And your daughter? Catherine will arrive in 3 weeks when her term ends. I have written to inform her of our marriage. By the time she joins you here, you will be established as mistress of Thornbridge Hall." He studied Cordelia over the rim of his glass. "She will test you. Children always test new authority. Do not allow her to undermine your position. I have some experience with difficult students, my lord. The governessing positions I held before." She trailed off, remembering the coldness of those houses, the contempt of parents who hired her, then treated her as scarcely better than a scullery maid. "You will address me as Blackwood when we are private. In company, my lord is appropriate." He set down his glass. "I suggest you retire. You have had a long day and will wish to begin familiarizing yourself with the household tomorrow." Dismissed. Again, Cordelia rose, uncertain of the protocol. Did one curtsy to one's husband? Before she could decide, Blackwood crossed the room and took her hand. His touch was warm, his grip firm. "You have made a practical choice, Cordelia. I hope you will not come to regret it." He lifted her hand to his lips, the gesture courtly and completely impersonal. "Good night, Lady Blackwood. Good night." She fled. There was no other word for it. To the bedchamber the housekeeper had shown her earlier. It was a magnificent room, all cream and gold and soft blues, with a 4-poster bed large enough to sleep 4 people comfortably. Her few possessions looked pathetic arranged on the dressing table. A maid appeared, young, nervous, clearly uncertain how to treat this peculiar countess who had arrived with no trousseau and no lady's maid of her own. "What is your name?" Cordelia asked gently. "Betsy, my lady. I've been assigned to serve you if you find me suitable." "I'm sure we will do very well together, Betsy." Cordelia managed a smile. "I confess I am unfamiliar with many aspects of this life. I will depend upon you to guide me when I make inevitable mistakes." The girl's face brightened. "Oh yes, my lady. Mrs. Daventry says you're ever so kind. Not like some ladies who—" She caught herself, blushing furiously. "I mean, it's quite all right." I take it as a compliment. Cordelia allowed Betsy to help her out of the cream silk gown and into a nightdress that had been part of the Marchioness's hasty trousseau preparations. When the girl had gone, Cordelia climbed into the enormous bed and lay staring at the canopy above her. She was married. She was a countess. She would never again suffer the casual cruelty of women like Lady Pemberton, never again endure the humiliation of being tolerated as charity. But she was also tied forever to a man who regarded her as a solution to a problem, who had been brutally clear about the limits of what he would give her, a man with secrets and a mistress and eyes like winter frost. Cordelia closed her own eyes and willed herself to sleep. She had made her choice. Now she would live with its consequences. The month passed in a blur of overwhelming detail. Mrs. Daventry proved to be a stern-faced woman of perhaps 50 who ran Thornbridge Hall with military precision. She viewed Cordelia with obvious skepticism at first, a penniless nobody elevated to countess, but softened gradually as Cordelia threw herself into learning the intricate machinery of aristocratic household management. There were accounts to review, menus to approve, servants to meet and remember, estate tenants to visit. Cordelia had been raised as a gentleman's daughter and knew the theory of such duties, but the scale of Thornbridge Hall dwarfed anything in her previous experience. The house alone employed 43 people. The estate encompassed 7,000 acres and included 3 villages. She made mistakes, called the head gardener by the under-gardener's name, approved a menu that Mrs. Daventry gently pointed out would be impossible to execute with the current kitchen staff, failed to recognize the vicar's wife when the woman called to welcome the new Lady Blackwood. But she learned, quickly, and she discovered to her surprise that she possessed a natural talent for organization and a memory for faces and details that served her well. Within 2 weeks, she could name every servant in the house and knew which tenant farmers were struggling with sick livestock and which had daughters of marriageable age. The estate steward, a taciturn man named Thornbury, began bringing her reports on crop yields and timber sales. "His lordship instructed me to keep you informed, my lady," he explained. "He said you possessed a mathematical mind that should be employed usefully." Cordelia was surprised Blackwood had noticed such a thing about her. She had not realized he had noticed anything at all beyond her suitability for his purposes. Letters arrived from London weekly, always in the same crisp handwriting. They contained instructions regarding household matters, questions about the estate, and no personal remarks whatsoever. Cordelia responded in kind, providing detailed reports on her activities and asking practical questions about budgets and priorities. Their correspondence might have been between business partners, which she supposed they were. 3 weeks after the wedding, Catherine Blackwood arrived from her school in Bath. Cordelia waited in the entrance hall, her hands folded, her expression calm despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. The girl who emerged from the carriage was tall for 14, dark-haired like her father, with the same pale eyes and the same expression of aristocratic disdain. "You must be Catherine," Cordelia said warmly. "I am so pleased to finally meet you." The girl looked her up and down with devastating thoroughness. "You are my father's new wife." "Yes. I hope we will become friends." "I do not need friends. I have a mother." Catherine's voice was cold, clipped, or had one. "She is dead, but you will never replace her." The words were clearly designed to wound. Cordelia absorbed them without visible reaction. "I would not presume to try. Your mother holds a place in your heart that is hers alone. I hope only to be a friend and guide to you, not a replacement for what you have lost." Catherine's eyes narrowed, as though Cordelia's reasonable response had somehow thwarted her. "My father married you because you are convenient and desperate. Everyone knows this." "That is true." Cordelia saw the girl's surprise at the admission. "I accepted his offer for similar practical reasons, but that does not prevent me from hoping we might treat each other with courtesy and kindness. I will treat you as you deserve." Catherine swept past her into the house, leaving Cordelia standing in the entrance hall. Mrs. Daventry approached, her expression sympathetic. "The young miss is difficult, my lady. Her mother's death was devastating for her, I'm sure." Cordelia watched Catherine's retreating back. "She is angry and grieving, and has no one to direct those feelings toward except convenient targets. I understand. You're very patient, my lady. I have had considerable practice in enduring hostility." Cordelia managed a wry smile. At least Miss Catherine is honest about her dislike. That is refreshing in its way. The next days were trying. Catherine was intelligent, well-educated, and devoted entirely to making Cordelia's life as uncomfortable as possible. She contradicted Cordelia in front of servants, refused to attend lessons, and spoke constantly of her mother's superior beauty, grace, and accomplishments. Cordelia responded with unfailing patience and gentle firmness. When Catherine disappeared for an entire afternoon, Cordelia searched for her personally rather than summoning servants, and found her in the estate's neglected orangery, weeping quietly among the overgrown citrus trees. "You may hate me," Cordelia said softly, sitting beside the girl on a stone bench. "That is your right. But you are also entitled to grief, Catherine. If you need to cry, you need not hide to do it. My father says crying is weakness." Catherine's voice was thick with tears. "Your father," Cordelia said carefully, "has his own ideas about strength and weakness. You need not adopt them all as your own." Catherine looked at her sharply. "You dare criticize him? I dare to suggest that even the most formidable men are sometimes wrong, and that grief is not weakness but proof of love." Cordelia hesitated, then added, "I lost my father too, not to death, but to bankruptcy and shame, which brought death soon after. I understand something of what you feel. It is not the same. No, everyone's grief is their own, but the loneliness of it, that I think, is universal." They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice small. "She was beautiful. My mother. Everyone said so." "Tell me about her," Cordelia invited, and Catherine did. For an hour, she spoke of her mother, her laughter, her love of music, her skill in watercolors. Cordelia listened without interruption, and only later realized that Catherine had never once mentioned her father in connection with her mother. The late Lady Blackwood existed in her daughter's memory as a separate entity, untouched by her marriage. It was strange. Cordelia filed the observation away with all the other oddities she had noticed about Thornbridge Hall, the wing of the house that remained locked and unused, the servants who never mentioned the former countess, the portrait gallery that contained images of every Earl of Blackwood for 5 generations, but no women save 2 stern ancestresses from the 17th century. Blackwood himself remained in London. His letters came weekly, full of instructions and questions but empty of any personal warmth. Cordelia wrote back faithfully, including reports on Catherine's progress. The girl was softening gradually, though she maintained her pose of hostility, and never asking when he intended to return. She told herself she did not care. Their arrangement was clear. This was a marriage of convenience, nothing more. But sometimes, late at night in her enormous bed, Cordelia wondered about the man she had married. The man who spoke of his sister with fierce protectiveness, who provided generously for Cordelia's family despite owing them nothing, who instructed his daughter's schoolmasters to encourage her scientific interests despite this being considered inappropriate for young ladies. A man of contradictions, a man with secrets, a man who, Cordelia was beginning to suspect, had married her for reasons beyond those he had stated. The realization should have alarmed her. Instead, she found it curiously intriguing. 4 months after their wedding, Blackwood finally returned to Thornbridge Hall.